This is the story of the disappearance of Margaret Ellen Fox, and yes, the phone call at the end of the story is real. This is a picture of Margaret, and she had just graduated the 8th grade, and she decided that she wanted to get some babysitting gigs. This all takes place in the summer of 1974, and Margaret lived in Burlington, New Jersey. Margaret put out her phone number looking for these babysitting gigs, and on June 19th, this guy by the name of John Marshall called her asking for her to babysit his 5-year-old son. The job was in Mount Holly, New Jersey, and Margaret's parents were kind of weird about it because she was only in 8th grade and she'd be traveling to a different city. But she gave them John Marshall's phone number, so they were okay with it. John had some babysitting stuff set up for her on a weekend, but he postponed it 3 times. Eventually, he called her again and said this time it was for real and he would pick her up in a red Volkswagen. Margaret told her parents that she would call right when she got there, but no call. A few hours went by and still no call. And she was supposed to be home at 2:30, but then she didn't show up. And then hours went by and she still didn't show up. Part 2 coming now. Part 2 of the disappearance of Margaret Ellen Fox, and yes, the phone call at the end of this story is real. So Margaret is missing and they have not heard from her. So they use the phone number that she left them and it starts ringing. A lady picks up and Margaret's mom asks, is somebody by the name of John Marshall there? And she's like, there's no one here named John Marshall. And the lady hangs up on her, and so they start freaking out again. So they call the phone number again, and yet a different voice picks up this time. And so it turns out that phone number is the phone number of a payphone outside of a store. It was all so suspicious, but then they found out that the manager of that store, his name was John Marshall. One of the cops actually knew this John Marshall, and he said, it's not him, trust me, he couldn't have done it. And so they quickly just ruled him out. Once the media got wind of what was going on and spread the news, a lot of other people said that they also got the same call from a guy named John Marshall for fake babysitting gigs. This goes to show that this was no accident, no coincidence, and Margaret was targeted. Last part, part 3, coming right now, and yes, it has the phone call in it. This is why you should never go scuba diving in a big group. This is a picture of Tom and Eileen Lonergan, and on January 25th, 1998, they had no idea what was about to happen to them. They wanted the chance to scuba dive in the largest coral reef system in the world. So they set sail with 26 other people and went 25 miles away from the coast of Queensland, Australia, which was their original location. Tom and Eileen only thought they'd be going scuba diving for 40 minutes and they'd come back up and then they'd go back to their hotel. So after about 40 minutes, everybody boards the boat and they go back to Queensland. The next day, another group of divers go out to the same location and one of the divers found dive weights at the bottom of the ocean. They didn't think anything of it until they couldn't find Tom and Eileen. It had been 2 full days until anybody even noticed that they were gone. The people in the group with them just assumed they were out doing stuff or seeing Australia. People wanted to check on them to see if they were okay, so they went to the Lonergan's hotel room, and sitting outside of their door was their luggage. And that is when everybody realized they left them behind, because it had been 2 days and their luggage was untouched. Running out of time, but part 2 coming right now. Part 3, the last part of the disappearance of Margaret Ellen Fox, and yes, the phone call at the end of this video is real. So Margaret was still missing. It was clearly not a coincidence. She was targeted by this guy going by the name of John Marshall. Margaret's parents have no idea where she is. They are worried sick, and the only way that they had to contact her was the number of that random payphone. Which I don't think is such a coincidence, but you can decide that in the comments. But one night, Margaret's parents are just sitting around the house and they get this phone call. It is from a man who is supposedly connected with the whole Margaret thing and demanding $10,000 to save her life. Here's the phone call.
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topic.
Who is it?
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topic? Who talks like that? Also, this is what scientists think that she would look like now, but we don't know. Now Margaret would be 60 years old. Okay, story time. This is really creepy and really unsettling. So this girl and her brother, let's call her Amanda, rode the same bike path every day, 3 times a day. One day they decided to take a different path and they passed this old camper with this creepy old man sitting outside of it. So he starts yelling at them and he goes, hey, where are you from? How old are you? Come here. Of course they ignored him and kept pedaling, and I don't think he liked that because he got up and started chasing after them. Of course he was an old man who was running and they had bikes, but it's still weird. Later on, Amanda and her brother made friends with this girl who was a little bit younger than them, and they would hang out together. They were all hanging out when Amanda and her brother went inside, and Emma said that she was going to go for a walk. An hour later, it was dark and nobody had seen Emma, and that's when everybody started realizing that nobody knew where Emma was. Amanda and her brother tell her parents about the creepy old man that they saw the other day, and they take them to the camper. So they knock on the camper, he answers the door, and they ask if he's with anybody, and he's like, no, I'm alone. Then they hear a really faint noise that kind of sounds like a girl, and he slams the door in their faces. So Amanda and Emma's parents call the police get there, they bust through the door, and guess who they find? Emma. Anyways, he was arrested for kidnapping. Yeah. Part 2 of Tom and Eileen Lonergan's disappearance. So yes, they had gone scuba diving in the largest coral reef system in the world with a very big group. And after 2 days of nobody seeing them, they started to get worried, so they ran to their hotel room, and their luggage had been untouched, sitting outside of their door. A massive search went underway, and both air and sea teams went to go look for the couple for 3 days. Rescue members found their diving gear ashore along with a dive slate. A dive slate is basically an easel or whiteboard that you can write on underwater. The slate said, "To anyone who can help us, we have been abandoned on Agincourt Reef, Reef 25, January 1998, 3 p.m. Please help us, come to rescue us, before we die. Help." But sadly, Tom and Eileen's bodies were never discovered. Like any group, it's way safer to go scuba diving in a group of like 3 people because it's a lot easier to see that you're missing one person because there's only 2 of you left. But this was a group of 26 people. So whose fault do you think it is, and do you think they're really dead? Do you think it was the captain or the scuba diving company's fault? Do you think it was the group's fault, or do you think it was Tom and Eileen's fault? Some people think this was a murder-suicide. Because in Tom's diary, he talked a lot about suicide. What do you think?
When I was like 5 years old, I almost got kidnapped. Story time. So back in the day, it used to be safe for kids to play out on the street. Or so I thought. You know, when you're a little kid, you really don't listen to your parents. Well, anyways, what happened was that my mom was cooking. And I was like, "Mommy, please, 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 let me play outside with my new scooter." My mom was always very protective, so she would not let us out of her sight. She's like, "I'm going to go outside for 2 minutes with you, and then we're going to come right back inside." I was like, "Yay!" So I'm just over here playing outside. And my mom was like, "Se me queman las tortillas, se me queman las tortillas." For those who don't know, that means she was burning tortillas. She's like, "Sit on the steps here in the driveway." You know me being a dumb little child. I was like, let me see how fast I can go. Whee! Here I go with my scooter. I'm still in the driveway. This man and this woman are walking across the street. Then that creepy man was like, "Hey, come here." That woman was like, "I just want to see your scooter." I dropped that scooter and I said, "Skirt." They started running after me up my driveway.
I literally want to cry. So if you didn't know, I have a sister, and her name's Ashley. And we both have boyfriends. And every night we both fall asleep on the phone with our boyfriends. So one day we're all hanging out and we're like just talking. And my sister's boyfriend looks at me and he's like, "You need to stop going into your sister's room in the middle of the night." And I look at him and I'm like, "What are you talking about? I don't have a reason to go into her room. Like I don't go into her room, especially in the middle of the night." Then my boyfriend hops in the conversation and he's like, No. He's like, "No, I hear Ashley go into Kayla's room every night and stare at her." So me and my sister both look at each other and we're like, we don't go into each other's rooms, do we? And we agreed that we do not. And they said this has been going on for months. So for months, somebody or something has been going into me and my sister's room for about 15 minutes every night and watching us sleep. But it only gets worse.
Put a finger down if in the 8th grade you took a taxi to school every single day because you lived too close to be eligible for the school bus and too far to walk, and you shared this taxi with another girl that went to your school, and the 2 of you ended up becoming kind of close by the end of the year. And then for your year-end grad trip to Quebec and Ottawa, you, your 2 best friends, and then a 4th totally random girl were all planning on being in the same hotel room. A week before you're supposed to leave for this trip, your taxi partner ends up telling you about how your 4th roommate called you the B word and a bunch of other nasty things behind your back. So obviously you're really upset by this, but you're hesitant to tell the teacher because A, you're not a snitch, B, she doesn't like you, and C, she was really clear about the rooms being final. So you end up telling her anyways because your best friend convinces you and comes with you to tell her. You break down into tears while telling her, but she ends up being really sympathetic towards you and promises you that she's going to get to the bottom of it, so you trust her until the next day you and your best friend get called down to the office by the random girl's teacher, and like for part 2.
So then you and your best friend go down to the office where the teacher is waiting for you, and then she takes you up to her classroom and already has 2 chairs ready for you guys. So the 2 of you sit down and the teacher sits down across from you. Then the teacher asks you to tell her your side of the story. So you and your best friend tell her exactly what you told the other teacher, which is that this 4th random roommate was calling you all of these nasty names, and you know this because your taxi partner told you so. Then the teacher looks at you and goes, "I don't believe a word you just said, and I know that you're lying." And you and your best friend are super confused and look at each other completely dumbfounded because you're not lying. And then the teacher goes on to say that she's going to tell you what she knows and believes to have happened, and accuses you guys of making up this entire story so that you wouldn't have to be in a room with this 4th random girl. You and your best friend obviously deny this because it's not true, but as you're pleading your case, you can tell that the teacher's not buying it. So you tell her, "If you don't believe me, ask my taxi partner." And then she tells you that she already talked to your taxi partner, who denied ever telling you that this happened. So you end up looking like a really big liar, and you're super confused as to what's going on, but you finally get to the bottom of it, and like for part 3.
Easy gland, medium brown and cream, glitter, blend under, lashes,
When I was in 4th grade, I started becoming friends with this girl, Maddie. She was the coolest girl in the grade. Everyone loved her. She wasn't a mean, popular girl, though. She was really nice. One day, Maddie invited me over for a sleepover, and I, of course, said yes. So I'm at Maddie's house. We're having a great time. But one thing I didn't tell Maddie is that I'm slightly lactose intolerant, and her dad made 3-cheese macaroni that night for dinner. But I was too nervous to say anything, so I ate the entire bowl. And then we started watching a movie, and I'm really not feeling good. So I go to the bathroom, and I take a huge shit. But for some reason, the toilet isn't flushing. It's not clogged, but you just can't flush. So I panic. I look through her bathroom cabinets and I find Ziploc bags. I reach into the toilet and I take my shit out and I put it in the Ziploc bag. And then I throw it out the window. A few weeks later in school, Maddie tells me that her mom is worried they have a peeping Tom coming to their house trying to scare them. Her mom called the police and asked them to keep an eye on her street. And when I asked Maddie why her mom thought that, she said, well, it's pretty gross, but he pooped in a Ziploc bag and threw it at her rose bushes. Maddie said my mom's really upset because the rose bushes are where my mom put my grandma's ashes. I was like, oh yeah, that's super scary. Hopefully they find the guy who did that. And hopefully Maddie never sees this TikTok.
For those of you who live in California, you might know this house. This is a picture of Sarah Winchester, and after her infant daughter died and her husband died of tuberculosis, she decided to move out west and start a new life. She bought this 8-bedroom farmhouse in San Jose, California, and then she turned it into this. Why, you ask? Well, her late husband owned this gun company, and she went to a psychic, and the psychic told her that the people that bought these guns from them, the people that they killed, were going to come and haunt her. So she turned this into this with all of the money she had, which nowadays would be about $76 million, to confuse the ghosts that were haunting her. She had carpenters and construction workers working around the clock nonstop to build staircases that led to nowhere. Very confusing architecture. Again, with the stairs, windows on the floors, along with doors that led to nowhere, 6 kitchens, 13 bathrooms, 10,000 windows, and 47 stairways and fireplaces, all to confuse the ghosts that live there. And you can go visit it.
A couple years ago, I went to a party with my brother. So my brother and I walk into the house where the party is, then the party host comes up to us and he's like, hey guys, go pick a cup. And so we go pick a cup. There was like a pink cup, a red cup, a gold cup. I didn't think much of it, so I just grabbed the pink cup. I didn't really know that many people at the party, so I just got my pink cup, got some water, went to go sit down in the living room. It was alone, it was dark. I was like, this is perfect. I love being alone. Actually, no, I don't. I just don't have friends, but it's okay. So as I'm just like sitting down in the darkness alone, this random guy just comes and sits really close to me. So then the guy randomly just like taps me on the shoulder. He's like, look at my pants. And I was like, oh, nice jeans, whatever. And he's like, no, look. And so I look closely and, you know, his pickle down there is like sticking up. Like, oh my god. I was like, dude, no, like, no. And he's like, but you got the pink cup. And I was like, yeah. He's like, the pink cup means you're down to smash whenever. Like, what? You said what?
I was a product of an affair between my mom and dad. My mom was already married and had a 1-year-old daughter. She wanted to abort me, but my dad begged her and paid her a hefty sum. She signed over all rights and I didn't see her for my 14 years of life. She recently contacted my dad saying she wanted to get to know me better, and he said it's entirely up to me. I was skeptical but decided to meet her. I've been talking to my mom's side for about 2 months when at a family gathering they all sat me down and said the reason they contacted me was because my half-sister was having kidney failure and was basically dying. At a loss for words, I got up and left. I told my dad and he said it's entirely up to me, but I should get tested just to see before I make my decision. So I did. When my mom found out, she thought this was me agreeing and told everyone the good news. I did a lot of thinking and I decided I would not be donating my kidney. This family had done nothing for me. The only reason they tried to get in contact was for my kidney. So I don't want anything to do with them. I got loads of hateful calls and messages, but decided to stand by my decision. My stepsister called me and said I'm a douche for giving her false hope. People are saying I'm wrong because I can save a life. My stepsister did nothing wrong. But I feel
really messy story time. When I was a freshman in high school, I had just transferred from private school to public school, so I had no friends, I knew nobody, and I didn't know anybody's reputation. Nobody decided to warn me about this girl anyways. So it was fall, it was football season, I was still new, and I had about like 3 friends, and we all hung out in this group. And I could actually walk to school. It was about like a 5-10 minute walk from my house. And the football game had pretty much ended, so we decided to leave to beat the crowd. And on my way home, some lady like hits me with her car. When I say hit me with her car, I don't mean she was going at like 50 miles an hour and my body rolled up on her windshield. It was a slight tap and I fell over. So she gets out of the car, first asks if I'm okay, and then proceeds to scream at me and threaten to call the cops because my body hit her car. And I'm standing there with my friends and we just decide to start running away from her. And at this point, I'm like 2 minutes away from my house. I'm posting part 2 right now.
I'm sorry, are you here to see me?
No, silly. I go here.
You go where?
Harvard. Law school.
You got into Harvard Law?
What, like it's hard?
put a finger down if you found out that your husband of 10 years cheated on you, so you're super heartbroken and you start going to therapy and you get the guts to tell him to leave the house, and all he replies to your long text message is okay, thank you. So you leave for the weekend so that he can come home and pack his things and leave, because you don't want to see him, because you don't know how you're going to react. So when you come back on a Sunday, you see that all his things are still here. He comes back a few days later after you not talking to him or seeing him for almost a week, and he tells you, why would you pack all his things and put them in the garage because you had to do it yourself? So then you tell him, hey, well, you're not coming home, like, where are you staying? And he's still not admitting that he's been staying at that address that you still have from the very first time that he didn't come home. So then you try to find out who she is, who this person is, because at this point you already know that it must be a lady. So you finally found his truck around the area where he's been staying, and you start yelling his name, and the neighbor comes out and she tells you, well, it's not me, it must be somebody else. I've been seeing a black Jeep picking him up. So then you realize,
in high school I had a friend who lived in this old small apartment building, and on the first floor was this old guy named Dave who had apparently lived in the building forever, and no one really knew what Dave's deal was. The only time people saw him is when he walked outside to walk his tiny dog, but other than that he never left his apartment. He had a nephew who delivered him groceries once a week. My friend just assumed that Dave was too old or had some sort of sickness that prevented him from leaving the house. One day my friend was coming home from school and Dave's nephew was leaving the apartment building. And my friend is really sweet, so she was like, hey, I know Dave sometimes has troubles getting out of the house, so if you ever need me to go over there and bring him something, let me know. I'm always happy to help. And the nephew looked really shocked and terrified. He was like, no, you should never go over to Dave's ever. And then he got really awkward and he was like, okay, gotta go, bye. And then a few weeks later, my friend was coming home from a Halloween party late at night. And when she got inside her apartment building, Dave's door on the first floor was wide open. And it was pitch black inside his apartment. But then she heard something behind her.
Brother, let's call her Amanda, rode the same bike path every day, 3 times a day. One day, they decide to take a different path, and they pass this old camper with this creepy old man sitting outside of it. So he starts yelling at them, and he goes, hey, where are you from? How old are you? Come here. Of course, they ignored him and kept pedaling, and I don't think he liked that because he got up and started chasing after them. Of course, he was an old man who was running, and they had bikes, but it's still weird. Later on, Amanda and her brother made friends with this girl who was a little bit younger than them, and they would hang out together. They were all hanging out when Amanda and her brother went inside, and Emma said that she was going to go for a walk. An hour later, it was dark and nobody had seen Emma, and that's when everybody started realizing that nobody knew where Emma was. Amanda and her brother tell her parents about the creepy old man that they saw the other day, and they take them to the camper. So they knock on the camper, he answers the door, and they ask if he's with anybody, and he's like, no, I'm alone. Then they hear a really faint noise that kind of sounds like a girl, and he slams the door in their faces. So Amanda and Emma's parents call the police get there, they bust through the door, and guess who they find? Emma. Anyways, he was arrested for kidnapping,